All right, it's just about draft day for the NFL. Hey, we hyping here though. We hyping here. You know, Death by Dynasty is getting you ready because, listen, the NFL's out here. They're looking for their next talent, and so are we in the Dynasty world. So we're gonna get right into it. Make this a nice little quick one-stop place for you guys to get ready for your draft. So we're kind of gonna go through position groups really quick and talk about like some of the strongest and weakest position groups offensively, of course, in this NFL draft. So Tyler, what's on your mind when it comes to that?
So I actually think it's interesting because there's a lot of talent at each of the positions, but they're very round based. You're like one position group goes, or they go in clusters, if you will, where it's like a lot of one position and then a whole other position goes, then it's to another position. So I think it's interesting there where it really is going to depend where you're drafting. So I think no matter where you're drafting in this, you're going to get some value.
I do feel like obviously we're going to have quarterbacks drafted early. Like I would not be surprised if we saw the first four picks be quarterbacks at this point. I mean,
It's
teams do
quarterback
this.
heavy.
It's quarterback heavy right now. I don't know if we've ever been. A lot of times there's like one or two guys that maybe could go first, or maybe there's one guy that's like guaranteed first overall pick. And I don't know if it's that solidified this year as it is in other years.
Yeah,
Like
definitely not in the NFL draft. The fan is different from Dynasty. Dynasty's it's funny because it's like a clear number one. And then I agree with what you're saying too with the quarterbacks, where I think there is like a number one quarterback in Dynasty for this year. I think Bryce Young
yeah,
um is the one there. But then everyone else, you really can make an argument either way. So I guess starting with quarterbacks, I think it's a lot of high talent. They're all going to go really early in the draft as far as dynasty and real draft. But I think all of them have their risks that come with them. And quarterback in general, we've talked about it before, is just such a risk. You never know. They could end up being complete busts in 2 years after being one of the most sought after positions. But the one good thing about quarterbacks too is they hold their value for at least a year. But yeah, so I think quarterback, if I were to rank the position, I would say it's like a B as far as strength goes.
yeah. It's so tough to say because honestly, every single year there's trouble. Like every single year, it's hard for teams to pick a quarterback. And honestly, it's more likely to be a bust than not be a bust. But the position is so valuable in the NFL and possibly even more valuable in a super flex dynasty league. So you got to take the risk. And like you said, like I do have a lot of question marks when it comes to CJ Stroud, when it comes to Will Levis. Like, and Will Levis is creeping up there. He might go number two. He could certainly go top four, top five. And I expect that. But I don't think he's good enough to be drafted up there. I just think it's the way the NFL is right now. They want to go get their quarterback. You talk about quarterbacks holding on to their value for decent amount of time just because the position is so valuable. A guy that I think this year is going to have that case, depending where he goes, is Anthony Richardson, because I think he's going to be in a boat kind of like how Jordan Love was, and Jordan Love's just now about to, assume the starting position, starting role in that offense. I think we're going to see Anthony Richardson kind of sitting for 2 years before he gets a starting job somewhere, possibly like going to the Vikings or something like that. And you see with Jordan Love, like he's really valuable again right now because he's now a starting quarterback. So there's kind of like his value got brought back up again because of that.
There's something I want to say about Will Levis because I've been noticing a trend that he's been getting a lot of hate from not only in our league, but across a lot of different platforms.
It's because he
And
eats banana peels, dude.
but what I want to get at is I could see him dropping down the draft board quickly. And I could see people, Dynasty is very trend based where the word gets going and then people get scared to make their own opinions. And I could see him potentially dropping to late in the first round of a dynasty draft. And I think if you're there, you got to be stoked to get him. And I mean, obviously there's red flags with all the quarterbacks, like I said. But I think if you can get him that late in the first round, which I think is a very real possibility at this point, I think you got to be excited about that. But another player too, that's kind of outside that top 3-4 players, Hendon Hooker. I feel like he's a player where he probably not going to ever be that great in the NFL, but with his athleticism and skill and ability to score rushing touchdowns, he's going to be a player that if he's on your team, he can make a spot start. If a player gets hurt, he can step in and have good weeks. And in a super flex league, that's you have to have players like that on your bench.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's value there. He's talented. You never know when at any point a backup quarterback could be extremely valuable in Superflex Dynasty. So I 100% agree with that. I do agree that if you get a quarterback that's available there at 110 to 112, that's certainly the pick you've got to make down there as far as those top 4 quarterbacks go coming out. So, but I'm going to switch over a little bit to the running back position because I actually think the running back position, it's kind of like you said, where to me, it seems like the wide receivers are more top heavy and the running backs are maybe there's a lot more value later in the draft. But so that's like one way to look at it. Or you could just say that the running backs kind of drop off pretty quickly in a way. I obviously, you got Bijan Robinson at the top, and then you get Gibbs, and he's going to be a guy who's going to help an NFL team immediately right away. After that, a lot of question marks after those top 2 guys. I think there is a lot of talent there. I think there's a lot of value getting a running back in the second round or late in the first round. But I do think that there's a talent drop off, and it's going to be a question mark.
Yeah, so I think I have a clear number 1 weakest position, and it's not going to change for me any year that we do this. And I'll talk about that later. But I think running back's the next weakest. I'd give it like a C-. And I take Bijan out of the question because obviously 1-1. If you have 1-1, go to Atlantic City, play the
now.
spots.
What if Bijan wasn't in this draft? Do we look at the position completely different just because there's such
it'd
a
be
big
horrible
drop off?
Well, like you said, Gibbs, I think is great. I think he's even being undervalued right now, and seeing him slip in drafts, I think he deserves to be pretty high. I also like Charbonnet. I think he has potential to be a 3-down back in the NFL, and he may be a boring player, but I mean, if you can get a player that can play 3 downs, you got to take a risk on him. I've been shocked by Kendre Miller, how he falls down, but after Zach Charbonnet, really any of the other guys, I feel like you're just taking an absolute risk on, and they could never be relevant. And there's a lot of those players. That's the nice thing is you have a big lot to choose from. So do your research, pick who you think's best. But they're all toss ups, and at this point, anyone who thinks that they know if any of those players is going to be good is lying to you, because it's just so they all have their weaknesses.
Yeah, I'd say big time look out for teams that are ready to move on from their running back or just need a running back. If they draft a running back, then that guy who was a question mark now becomes a little bit more of, okay, we don't know what his longevity is going to look like, but this team wants to use him pretty quickly kind of thing. I mean, I see, even the Falcons trying to move off of blanking here.
Algier, however you pronounce it.
Yeah, trying to move off of him. I mean, there's been Dalvin Cook trade rumors, so I could see the Vikings drafting a running back, and that could be pretty valuable. Anyone with an old like the Cowboys for sure. They have Tony Pollard on the franchise.
They're not committed to him. It doesn't seem that he could very well be gone soon.
So that's where those question marks turn into, well, he might be more valuable more immediately. I don't know what he looks like long term necessarily. There's still question there, but the fact that they're going to use him in that offense automatically makes them more valuable for sure. So I would look out for a guy like Tank Bigsby, who's kind of fallen in over the past couple of weeks, past couple of months, but he was like the 3rd favorite running back originally coming out. So I think he just kind of measured badly at the draft, at the combine, and that can, you'll lose your stock pretty quickly that way. So
how can you not draft a running back named Tank? That's like,
honestly,
the number one, the Dynasty names you can come up with, but also just, I mean, like that has star running back written all over it. But I hinted at it before. I think the weakest position year after year is tight end, and there's two great tight ends that could go probably early in the second round, but they just have zero value in dynasty fantasy football. Think of like great. There's so many good young tight ends right now, and you would be hard pressed to find an early second or to get an early second for one of them. And they're consistent great tight ends like Fryermuth or Njoku or uh I don't know, any of literally name half.
Hawkinson, yeah.
Yeah, name half the NFL and they're a serviceable tight end. And obviously you have your Kittles, you have your Kelseys. But outside of that, they just don't have value. And even they're extremely undervalued as they already are. So
If
I
you
think
hit
tight
on a
end,
tight end, that's like a gold mine. Like that's probably the hardest thing to hit on in the in a fantasy draft.
yeah, I'm just not taking that risk. I don't care where I'm at. I'm not drafting a tight end in the first or second round in drafts.
Yeah, they don't. Most of them aren't going to put your team over the edge. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I was kind of thinking like, oh, maybe the tight end position, but the tight end position is always the weakest. So for sure, we're gonna move on to what I think is the strongest position coming out, and that's the wide receiver position.
They're
I can tell you agree with me. So yeah, I mean, I just think that there's just so much talent. I mean, it's just that simple to put. I mean, we know. I think you got obviously Jackson Smith and Jigbu right at the top.
stud.
He's gonna be great. He's gonna be elite. It just depends on exactly where he goes again and how he's gonna be utilized. Is he gonna be the wide receiver one? That's again another thing to look out for in the NFL draft.
If he goes to Baltimore, though, that could be scary. That's a horrible situation for any wide receiver at this point, and he very well could go there.
Going to Baltimore, okay, let's say Lamar's there. Lamar, not the best passing quarterback, but whatever, not the worst situation in the world. But even if Lamar is there for 1 year, I don't know how long Lamar is going to be there.
He
And then
may
you
not.
have a
He may not even be there this year. You don't know.
yeah, so that's a big question mark at the quarterback position there, and I 100% agree. So yeah, look for those situations where they're going to somewhere where that doesn't have a good quarterback, or I wouldn't completely shy away from this. But keep in mind, if they're not wide receiver one, they're going to be wide receiver two, maybe, and wide receiver three. Keep that in mind when they get drafted by an NFL team, where they're going to stack up within that offense as well. But I mean, I could just start listing guys. I mean, Quentin Johnson, Addison out of USC, yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigbu, like I just mentioned. I mean, this class at the wide
Flowers.
receiver,
I
yeah, and I think they're all dynasty first round picks, all those guys I just mentioned. So if you see any of those guys dropping late first round in dynasty, early second round, I couldn't imagine it happening, but certainly jump on it immediately.
and that's the thing is I give this position probably B plus A minus. But I think it could be even better because quarterbacks are going to go so early in their risk. So these top in other years where there's not so many quarterbacks that are going to be NFL ready from the start, they're going to be top 5 picks. So I just think there's so much talent that you're getting for great value late in the first round. Obviously JSN stud. But I do think like, let's say Addison goes to like Kansas City or like Buffalo. He could very easily that's what you got to look for at
Those
the
are
draft.
great landing spots for wide receivers.
Kansas City, whichever one of these guys right here lands in Kansas City is automatically set up to probably be the number 1 wide receiver off the like
There's
JSN.
not really anybody else.
That's what I mean. Like JSN, I think again, like I was going back to the well, I think it was or quarterbacks. It's same thing where I think JSN's the clear one, but then after that, there's some more questions in there.
There are some more question marks for sure.
But the other thing, the receiver position too, is like I feel like that's such a competitive position where they could end up like Jalen Reagor, where they were supposed to be good coming out of college. So like a lot of the research I've been doing, like Hyatt seems like a player who has that like deep ball potential and it can like break an offense open. But I feel like those are the riskiest positions. It's that boomer bust. But in a wide receiver, that's what you're looking for. Just load them up on your bench. That's the great thing about Dynasty. Have a taxi squad, have 20 player bench, and just have players. You're able to take these risks on players when you're able to have other positions. So yeah, I agree with you that the receivers is the most talented position.
And by the way, I'd much rather take a risk on a wide receiver than on a running back, because even if that running back is a solid running back, there's very few running backs in this league that are solidified running backs for RB1s for 10 years.
Wide receivers get the most
years.
opportunities. Receivers get the most opportunities. And if you have a PPR, we have half PPR, like that. Obviously, that takes into account too. So receivers are the most. If you have to have a lot of good receivers to be able to compete for a championship in Dynasty.
Yep.
They don't have to be ones, but they have to be able to. You have to have the players on your team that you can pick the matchups.
Look at, like we just said, Tyler Algier, or for the Texans, Pierce, guys who had great years last year in their rookie season. The teams are ready to move on from them and get somebody else.
I forgot Pierce was a running back until you just said his name, to be honest. And I think he was going like real early in redraft leagues too. Yeah. Was he a rookie last year? No, 2 years ago.
Maybe 2 years ago, maybe. But
yeah, he's exactly. That's a great point. He had so much potential. I mean, there's so many running backs fall off so quick too. That's the thing.
And it's not like he had bad seasons either. Like, they were solid running back seasons. It's just so easy to move on from running backs in the NFL. So
you get a stud wide receiver, you're set. A stud running back could be a stud running back one year and not a stud running back the next year. It's very, very few times where stud wide receivers aren't. Like Allen Robinson's one example, but there's very few, and you can even point to his situation now and injuries and whatnot, but there's very few times wide receivers, you know what you have when you have a good wide receiver, and you can just ride that out for 8+ years.
Yeah. When it comes to the running back position, you have your Christian McCaffreys, you have your Alvin Kamaras, you have your Saquon Barkleys, and let's just say Derrick Henry. But like
even Kamara, but like look at them. Look at Kamara and Henry. Like 2 years ago, they were getting so much value, and now they're maybe a first round pick. It's
Kamara's on the downswing of his career for sure. I mean, and so is Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry, like, I could see him dropping off real quick just because of him being a workhorse back, and he's going to get banged up so easily. So yeah, the shelf life is very short on those guys. So you would really have to hit on someone very good, like a Bijan, who you know is going to be that guy. I mean, you all but know he's going to be a Saquon Barkley. But otherwise, your running back is going to be solid for 2 years at best, 3 years at best.
So I think we agree here. We go wide receiver, quarterback, running back, tight end. And like by tight end, I mean like
tight end's just like not even worth it. Listen, I drafted Kyle Pitts 103 a few years ago. I'm still waiting on him.
Yeah. You lived the experience yourself. You lived it firsthand.
Absolutely, I did. So I don't know. Any last thoughts on the draft?
No, I'm just excited to see what happens. You never know till draft day. Even non-rookies, players that move around, what happens. I mean, look at AJ Brown last year and these big moves. So the draft day is always super exciting. I'm excited to see it, and I know we'll be able to go a lot more in depth with the rookies and mock drafts once we know what teams they're on, and then we could really get down to business. You know, I might show up in a suit one day. We don't know.
My last thoughts on the draft are look out for those trades. That's going to happen. Also, like I just said, look out for teams that heading into the draft, you know, they're about to replace a guy. Let's say you have Tyler Algier on your roster. Trade him now. Like, trade if you have an RB1 who you don't think is going to be the RB1 by the end of this weekend, trade him now. It's your very last chance. Otherwise, his value is going to absolutely plummet.
I agree. I'm excited. What is it? 2 days? All right, let's go. Probably like one day when you're listening, or maybe today. It might be today. It might be today, honestly.
But that's okay. Go check out our socials for all the content you need heading up to the draft. Otherwise, of course, you'll see more of us out and about, and maybe coming to a town near you. Death by Dynasty.
Grab tickets to our meet and greet in Chicago.
Peace.
Lotto on the beat.